Let's talk about the value of a funeral. I really believe in the celebration of life, and I really believe that every life lived deserves a celebration of life funeral. Before the 1900s, people usually died at home. The old and the sick were cared for by family members who were supported by friends and neighbors. When a death occurred, everybody was involved with preparing the body for the funeral and burial. Death was a hands-on experience and a household word. Death was an accepted part of life. Complex social and economic changes have given us a new way of thinking about death. Today, we deny its significance. We try to ignore the reality of death by giving up the funeral ritual that eases its pain. We have dispensed with saying goodbye to our dead in a loving way by handing our death responsibilities to strangers. Today, we claim that funerals are morbid. They make us feel unhappy and are too expensive. Too expensive. Can you imagine that? Have you ever stopped to think about how much you spend on a car and how many cars you have in your lifetime, and yet all of those cars end up in the junkyard? The funeral. It might be expensive for one moment, but your loved one deserves that. It truly can be a celebration of life, and you can celebrate the values by which that loved one lived.
The value of the funeral. Well, first of all, my family owns a funeral home, so I've been in and out of different funeral rituals for a lot of my life. I've also worked in our funeral home, and I've seen families have funerals every day, so I do believe they can be extremely valuable. As the daughter and granddaughter of funeral directors, and also now a grief counselor, I could describe many textbook reasons why funerals are important. But let me tell you a little bit about a personal experience. A few months ago, my grandma died. The first few days my family was together were emotionally exhausting. But every part of that time was also necessary. Necessary so we could all cry, necessary so we could share stories and remember, but really necessary so we could acknowledge the reality of what happened and also to say goodbye. Without the funeral services we had, our family would not have had such an open chance to grieve together and to honor my grandma. So I strongly suggest that you consider having a funeral that truly celebrates the life of the person you love.
The funeral is valuable to the family for many reasons. It's a transition from a life where the person was always present to a relationship where it's more of memory. And it's important because it gives the folks an opportunity to draw support from the community. For example, we have a number of families that come into the funeral home, they sit down, or they come in, they see the person, which is the first important part, is the seeing is believing part. Our emotional side needs to see that person. Our logical part of our brain can tell us the person's dead, but the rest of us doesn't want to believe it. So they see the person there. There are a huge amount of emotions. It ranges from a few tears to outright sobbing and nearly collapsing in front of the casket. That's an important cathartic need that I think a lot of families have. Everybody expresses it differently. The next part, the next value of the funeral is having the opportunity for all the friends and relatives from the community to come in and talk to people. We see people as they come in the front door of the funeral home, or I see them downtown and they say, oh, I just can't stand to come in your place because it's so sad. I think, well, yes, it is a sad time, but they still come. They still come in and they walk in and they talk to the families. They give them a hug, which is probably the best thing they can do. That's the best amount of support. You don't have to say a word. But then usually after the initial tears and after the initial emotions, they start to talk about the person who's died, and they say, oh my gosh, I remember when we did this and it was so funny. Or I remember when he helped me with this and I learned from that. And they talk about all those things, and all those tears start to turn to a little smile. And then pretty soon after folks have been in here for a little while, it's laughter. You can hear laughter coming out of the room, out of the visitation room, because they're remembering all those great things. And that's important to the family because, number one, it eliminates their possibility of being isolated, which is bad for a family at a time like this. They need help. They need support. They need somebody to tell them everything's going to be okay. Number two, it affirms the life of the person because that makes them feel like, oh, my dad did have value. He did help those people. They did learn from him. It also reminds the family that they're not going to be forgotten. Dad's not going to be forgotten. And that's important to a lot of people.
This attitude of a quick burial or cremation devalues life and diminishes the worth of our human experience. The truth is, how we treat our aged, our infirm, and our dead reflects the attitude we have about ourselves. Judging from accounts in today's newspapers, society's self-esteem is at a low point. We are not treating each other and the dead very well. If we are planning or have a chance to plan a funeral for someone else, we have the opportunity of a lifetime, and that's no pun, to show the community and ourselves the respect we have for the person who has died. As with other surprises, death is usually shocking. We need help reorganizing our stunned emotions. Rituals will help us express what we feel and define what has happened. They can give us the strength and the means to gently and slowly disconnect from the deceased. They give us permission to go on with life without the person we loved, while still staying connected in a healthy way to our memories. That is what a funeral does. Think about it. The body is present with flowers, a minister or eulogist, a gathering of friends and relatives, music, poems, scripture reading, all showing respect for our loved one. We should feel good about that. Scientists keep searching for ways to postpone death. They found a few extra years for most of us, but death is still mandatory. There is a death waiting to occur in each of us. One day, we will be the companion who was obliged to die. Those who loved us will, to paraphrase Emily Dickinson, retire that day from ordinary days to be remembered with soft distinction. We will want our last impression to be a positive statement about our life. Funeral rituals give us a systematic method to do this in a meaningful way.
What do we have in most town squares? You have monuments to people. We have one down here. It's a monument to the people who died in the wars. You have other monuments in the cemetery that commemorate people. You have statues in the town square in many places about great people that they don't want to forget. And in most cases, they don't want anybody to forget about mom and dad. That's what they come in here for. Now, it doesn't matter if it's in the funeral home, it doesn't matter if it's in a church, it doesn't matter if it's in the park across the street. It's important for people to have that opportunity to draw support. I feel personally it's important for them to have some service. I feel it's important for them to have a funeral director help them with that, because we're the guys that just take care of everything. We do everything for them so that all they have to do is come in and draw the support from the family. We take care of all the details.
A few years ago, my uncle summoned me to his summer home in Indiana. He was a very bright man, an intelligent man. He'd been a high school principal. And on that day, he said to me, he said, "John, I'm about ready to die, and when I die, I just want to be cremated. I don't want any memorial service. I don't want a funeral. I don't want anything. Is this okay?" And my Uncle Charlie was very opinionated, but I looked at Uncle Charlie and I said, "No, it's not okay." I said, "You need to have a visitation where people that love you and care about you can come and show their respect, where there can be a social gathering, where children will be able to remember their Uncle Charlie, and then you need to have a funeral where the values by which you have lived are expressed to a congregation of people." He thought for a moment and he said, "Okay, if I do this, will you be the speaker that day?" And though he put me on the spot, I looked at him and I said, "Yes." 4 months later, he died. Now, can you imagine this? At his visitation, which he didn't want to have, over 600 people filed through the funeral home in a 4-hour period. And at that little country church where I spoke, every seat was full and people were lined up on the sides of the church. It is very, very important to celebrate life with funeral rituals. I plead with you, if you're thinking about having just a quick cremation, don't do it. Talk to your funeral director about a funeral.